नमस्कार दोस्तों, स्वागत है आप सभी का मेरे इस नई वीडियो में और आपके अपने यूट्यूब चैनल मजेदार रीडिंग में। आज हम लोग करने आ रहे हैं चैप्टर नंबर 10 पॉलिटिकल साइंस एनसीईआरटी क्लास 8th की रीडिंग, जो कि इसका लास्ट चैप्टर ही है, लॉ एंड सोशल जस्टिस। ठीक है दोस्तों, मैं पहले आपको बता दूं दोस्त कि मैं आपके लिए केवल रीडिंग करता हूं और ना ही आपको सब चैप्टर समझाता हूं और ना ही आपको इसके नोट्स लिखवाता हूं, क्योंकि मैं मानता हूं दोस्त कि नोट्स और चैप्टर का डिस्क्रिप्शन समझाना आपको तो बहुत जगह मिल जाएगा, लेकिन आपको जो होलिस्टिक रीडिंग होती है दोस्तों पूरे चैप्टर की, वो आपको बहुत ही रेयर केस में मिलती है। इसलिए मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि आपको रीडिंग करवा दो दोस्त, ताकि आप जो हैं आराम से पूरा चैप्टर का ओवरव्यू ले सके और 3-4-5 बार रीडिंग सुन लेंगे ना दोस्तों। टाइम बहुत कम लगता है, आधे घंटे 45 मिनट्स, मतलब 30 to 40 मिनट्स के अंदर अंदर मैं रीडिंग करवा देता हूँ दोस्त। ठीक है, तो टाइम बहुत कम लगता है और आपके हिसाब से क्या होगा कि आपको रीडिंग करनी भी नहीं पड़ेगी और मैं आपको आपके लिए इनडायरेक्ट, मतलब आपका क्या हो जाएगा, इनडायरेक्ट रीडिंग हो जाएगा और समझना भी हो जाएगा दोस्तों, कि जितना कि आप इंटरप्रेट कर सकें। ठीक है, चलिए दोस्तों तो शुरू करते हैं। डू यू रिकॉल द स्टोरी ऑफ अ शर्ट फ्रॉम योर क्लास 7 टेक्स्ट बुक? वी सॉ देयर दैट अ चेन ऑफ मार्केट्स लिंक द प्रोड्यूसर ऑफ कॉटन टू द बायर ऑफ द शर्ट in the supermarket. Buying and selling was taking place at every step in the chain. Many of the people directly or indirectly involved in the production of shirt. The small farmer producing cotton, the weavers of erode or the workers in the garment export factory faced exploitation or an unfair situation in the market. Markets everywhere tend to be exploitative of people, whether as workers, consumers, or producers. To protect people from such exploitation, the government makes certain laws. These laws try to ensure that the unfair practices are kept at a minimum in the markets. Let us take a common market situation where the law is very important. This is the issue of workers' wages. Private companies, contractors, business persons normally want to make as much profit as they can. In the drive for profits, they might deny worker their rights and not pay them wages. For example, in the eyes of the law, it is illegal or wrong to deny workers their wages. Similarly, to ensure that workers are not underpaid or are paid fairly, there is a law on minimum wages. A worker has to be paid not less than the minimum wage by the employer. The minimum wages are revised upwards every few years. As with the law on minimum wages, which is meant to protect workers, there are also laws that protect the interests of producers and consumers in the market. These help ensure that the relations between these three parties, the worker, consumer and producer, are governed in a manner that is not exploitative. ये सब कुछ क्वेश्चन है दोस्तों, आप लोग अपने टीचर के साथ डिस्कस कर जरूर करें. Workers in a textile mill in Ahmedabad faced with greater competition from power looms. A majority of the textile mills closed down during the 1980s and 1990s. Power looms are small units with 4 to 6 looms. The owners operate them with hired and family labor. It is well known that conditions of work in the power looms are far from satisfactory. Table 1 provides some important laws relating to the protection of these various interests. Column 2 and column 3 in table 1 state why and for whom these laws are necessary. Based on discussions in the classrooms, you have to complete the remaining entries in table. तो ये आपको remaining entry complete करनी है दोस्तों. एक entry मैं आपके लिए पढ़ दे रहा हूँ. पहला वाला, minimum wages act specifies that wages should not be below a specified minimum. Why is it necessary? Many workers are denied fair wages by their employers because they badly need work. Workers have no bargaining power and are paid low wages. Whose interest does the law protect? This law is meant to protect the interests of all workers, particularly farm laborers, construction workers, factory workers, domestic workers, etc. तो अब बाकी सारे टेबल आप लोग अपने टीचर से डिस्कस करके जरूर कंप्लीट करें दोस्तों. ठीक है, but merely law making is not enough. The government has to ensure that these laws are implemented. This means that the law must be enforced. Enforcement becomes even more important when the law seeks to protect the weak from the strong. For instance, to ensure that every worker gets Fair wages. The government has to regularly inspect work sites and punish those who violate the law. When workers are poor or powerless, the fear of losing future earnings or facing reprisals often forces them to accept low wages. Employers know this well and use their power to pay workers less than the fair wage. In such cases, it is crucial that laws are enforced. Through enforcing and upholding these laws, the government can control the activities of individuals or private companies so as to ensure social justice. Many of these laws have their basis in the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. For instance, the right against exploitation says that no one can be forced to work for low wages or under bondage. Similarly, the Constitution lays down no child below the age of 14 shall be employed to work in any factory or mines or any other hazardous employment. How are these laws played out in practice? To what extent do they address the concerns of social justice? These are some questions of this that this chapter will now go on to explore. तो ये सब क्वेश्चन हम लोग एक्सप्लोर करेंगे अभी. According to the 2001 census, over 12 million children in India aged between 5 and 14 work in various occupations including hazardous ones. In October 2006, the government amended the Child Labor Prevention Act, banning children under 14 years of age from working as domestic servants or as workers in dhabas, restaurants, tea shops, etc. It made employing these children a punishable offence. Anyone violating the ban must be penalized with a punishment ranging from a jail term of 3 months to 2 years and or fine of rupees 10,000 to 20,000 fine of rupees 10,000 to 20,000. The central government had asked state governments to develop plans to rescue and rehabilitate children who are working as domestic servants. To date, only three state governments, namely Maharashtra, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, have published these plans. Even today, more than a year after this law was passed, 74% of child domestic workers are under the age of 16. Bhopal gas tragedy. The world's worst industrial tragedy took place in Bhopal 24 years ago. Union Carbide (UC), an American company, had a factory in the city in which it produced pesticides. At midnight on 2nd December 1984, methyl isocyanate (MIC), a highly poisonous gas, started leaking from this UC plant. Remembers Azia Sultan, a survivor. At about 12:30 am, I woke to the sound of my baby coughing badly. In the half night, I saw that the room was filled with a white cloud. I heard people shouting, "Run, run." Then I started coughing, with each breath seeming as if I was breathing in fire. My eyes were burning. Within 3 days, more than 8,000 people were dead. Hundreds of thousands were maimed. Most of these exposed to the poison gas came from poor, working class families, of which nearly 50,000 people are today too sick or to work. Among those who survived, many developed severe respiratory disorders, eye problems and other disorders. Children developed peculiar abnormalities like the girl in the photo. A child severely affected by the gas. ये देखिए दोस्तों, मास क्रीमेशंस हो रहा है द नेक्स्ट मॉर्निंग. भोपाल गैस ट्रेजेडी हुआ था दोस्तों, ठीक है. मेंबर्स ऑफ यूसी एम्प्लॉइज यूनियन प्रोटेस्टिंग. Gas victims with the gas relief minister. Bags of chemicals lie strewn around the UC plant. The struggle for justice goes on. What is a worker's worth? If we are to understand the events leading to Bhopal disaster, we have to ask, why did Union Carbide set up its plant in India? One reason why foreign companies come to India is for cheap labor. Wages that the company pay to workers, say in the USA, are far higher than what they have to pay to workers in poorer countries like India. For lower pay, companies can get longer hours of work. Additional expenses such as for housing facilities for workers are also fewer. Thus, companies can save costs and earn higher profits. Accidents are common to construction sites, yet very often safety equipment and other precautions are ignored. Cost cutting can also be done by other more dangerous means. Lower working conditions, including lower safety measures, are used as ways of cutting costs. In the UC plant, every safety device was malfunctioning or was in short supply. Between 1980 and 1984, the work crew for the MIC plant was cut in half from 12 to 6 workers. The period of safety training for workers was brought down from 6 months to 15 days. The post of night shift worker for the MIC plant was abolished. Read the following comparison between UC's safety system in Bhopal and its other plant in the US. At West Virginia, USA, computerized warning and monitoring systems were in place, whereas the UC plant in Bhopal relied on the manual gauges and the human sensors to detect gas leaks. At the West Virginia plant, emergency evacuation plans were in place but non-existent in Bhopal. Why are there such sharp differences in safety standards across countries? And even after the disaster happened, why was the compensation to victims so low? One part of the answer lies in what is perceived as the worth of an Indian worker. One worker can easily replace another. Since there is so much unemployment, there are many workers who are willing to work in unsafe conditions in return for a wage. Making use of the workers' vulnerability, employers ignore safety in workplaces. Thus, even so many years after the Bhopal gas tragedy, there are regular reports of accidents in construction sites, mines or factories due to the careless attitude of the employers. एनफोर्समेंट ऑफ सेफ्टी लॉज, ये कैलस वर्ड भी इंपॉर्टेंट है दोस्तों, आपको कम्पिटेटिव एग्जाम्स में काम आ सकता है सिनोनिम या एंटोनिम के लिए, ठीक है दोस्तों. तो एनसीईआरटी पढ़ना इसीलिए इंपॉर्टेंट है दोस्त, याद रखना. एनफोर्समेंट ऑफ सेफ्टी लॉज. एज द लॉ मेकर एंड एनफोर्सर, द गवर्नमेंट इज सपोज्ड टू एंश्योर दैट safety laws are implemented. It is also the duty of the government to ensure that the right to life guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution is not violated. What was the government doing when there were such blatant violations of safety standards in the UC plant, in the UC plant? First, the safety laws were lax in India. Second, even these weak सेफ्टी लॉज वेर नॉट इन्फोर्स्ड. केयरलेस का मतलब होता है दोस्तों कठोर, ठीक है ना. अच्छा, आगे बढ़ते हैं. ये सब क्वेश्चन दोस्तों आप लोग अपने टीचर के साथ मिलकर डिस्कस कर लें. जो सारे इंपॉर्टेंट होते हैं उनको, कुछ जो इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं होता उसको छोड़ देंगे दोस्तों. गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स रिफ्यूज टू रिकॉग्नाइज द प्लांट एज हैजार्डस एंड अलाउड इट टू कम अप इन अ पॉपुलेटेड लोकेलिटी. When some municipal officials in Bhopal objected that the installation of an MIC production unit in 1978 was a safety violation, the position of the government was that the state needs the continued investment of the Bhopal plant, which provides jobs. It was unthinkable, according to them, to ask the UC to shift to cleaner technology or safer procedures. Government inspectors continued to approve the procedures in the plant even when repeated incidents of leaks from the plant made it obvious to everybody that things were seriously wrong. This, as you know, is contrary to what the role of a law-making and enforcement agency should be. Instead of protecting the interests of the people, their safety was being disregarded both by the government and by private companies. This is obviously not at all desirable. With more industries being set up both by local and foreign businesses in India, there is a great need for stronger laws protecting workers' rights and better enforcement of these laws. Recently, a large travel agency was asked to pay rupees 8 lakh as compensation to a group of tourists Their foreign trip was poorly managed and they missed Disneyland and shopping in Paris. Why did the victims of Bhopal gas tragedy then get so little for a lifetime of misery and pain? ये सब देख सकते हैं दोस्तों आप लोग, मतलब यहाँ पे बताया गया कि भोपाल गैस ट्रेजेडी के लोगों को कितनी दिक्कत हो गई थी. तो ये सब है दोस्तों, ठीक है. नीड न्यू लॉज टू प्रोटेक्ट द environment. In 1984 there were very few laws protecting the environment in India, and there was hardly any enforcement of these laws. The environment was treated as a free entity, and any industry could pollute the air and water without any restrictions. Whether it was our rivers, air, groundwater, the environment was being polluted and the health of the people disregarded. Thus, not only was UC a beneficiary of lower safety standards, it didn't have to spend any money to clean up the pollution. In the USA, this is a necessary part of the production process. The Bhopal disaster brought the issue of environment to the forefront. Several thousands of persons who were not associated with the factory in any way were greatly affected because of the poisonous gases leaked from the plant. This made people realize that the existing laws, though weak, only covered the individual worker and not persons who might be injured due to industrial accidents. In response to this pressure from environmental activists and others, in the years following the Bhopal gas tragedy, the Indian government introduced new laws on the environment. Henceforth, the polluter was to be held accountable for the damage done to environment. The environment is something that people over generations will share, and it could not be destroyed merely for industrial development. Pumps at contaminated wells are painted red by the government around the UC factory in Bhopal, yet local people continue to use them as they have no other accessible source of clean water. क्या है हाउ मेनी बाप रे ये हो गया. The courts also gave a number of judgments upholding the right to a healthy environment as intrinsic to the fundamental right to life. In Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar 1991, the Supreme Court held that the right to life is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution, and it includes the right to enjoyment of it includes the right to the enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full employment of life. The government is responsible for setting up laws and procedures that can check pollution, clean rivers, and introduce heavy fines for those who pollute. Environment as a public facility. In recent years, while the courts have come out with strong orders on environmental issues, these have sometimes affected people's livelihoods adversely. For instance, the courts directed industries in residential areas in Delhi to close down or shift out of the city. Several of these industries were polluting the neighborhood, and discharge from these industries was polluting the river Yamuna because they had been set up without the following rules. Because they had been set up without following the rules. But while the court's action solved one problem, it created another. Because of the closure, many workers lost their jobs. Others were forced to go to faraway places where these factories had relocated, and the same problem now began to come up in these areas. For now, these places became polluted, and the issue of the safety conditions of workers remained unaddressed. Recent research on environmental issues in India has highlighted the fact that the growing concern for the environment among the middle class is often at the expense of the poor. So, for example, slums need to be cleaned as part of a city's beautification drive, or as in case above, a polluting factory is moved to the outskirts of the city. Emissions from vehicles are a major cause of environmental pollution. In series of rulings 1998 onwards, the Supreme Court had ordered all public transport vehicles using diesel were to switch to switch to compressed natural gas CNG. As a result of this move, air pollution in cities like Delhi came down considerably. But a recent report by Center for Science and Environment, New Delhi, shows the presence of high levels of toxic substance in the air. This is due to emissions from cars run on diesel rather than petrol, and a sharp increase in the number of cars on the road. And while this awareness of the city and while this awareness of the need for a clean environment is increasing, there is little concern for the safety of the workers themselves. The challenge is to look for solutions where everyone can benefit from a clean environment. One way this can be done is to gradually move to cleaner technologies and processes in factories. The government has to encourage and support facilities to do this. It will need to fine those who pollute. This will ensure that the workers' livelihoods are protected, and both workers and communities living in around the factories enjoy a safe environment. Workers outside closed factories thrown out of work. Many of the workers end up as small traders or as daily wage laborers. Some might find work in even smaller production units where the conditions of work are even more exploitative and the enforcement of laws weaker. यहाँ पे कुछ क्वेश्चंस दे रखे हैं दोस्तों, इसको आप अपने टीचर से डिस्कस करके देख सकते हैं कि इंपॉर्टेंट है या नहीं. जैसा आपके टीचर बता दें वैसा आप लोग इसके आंसर लिख लें या फिर याद कर लें इनको. Advanced countries are relocating the toxic and hazardous industries to developing countries to take advantage of the weaker laws in these countries and keep their own countries safe. South Asian countries, particularly India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, play hosts for industries producing pesticides, asbestos or processing zinc and lead. Ship breaking is another hazardous industry that is growing rapidly in South Asia. Old ships no longer in use are sent to shipyards in Bangladesh and India for scrapping. These ships contain potentially dangerous and harmful substances. This photo shows workers breaking down a ship in Alang, Gujarat. देख सकते हैं दोस्तों यहाँ पे. Conclusion: laws are necessary in many situations whether this be the market, office or factory, so as to protect people from unfair practices. Private companies, contractors, business persons, in order to make higher profits, resort to unfair practices such as paying workers low wages, employing children for work, ignoring the conditions of work, ignoring the damage to the environment and hence to the people in the neighborhood, etc. A major role of the government therefore is to control the activities of private companies by enforcing and upholding laws so as to prevent unfair practices and ensure social justice. This means that the government has to make appropriate laws and also has to ensure the laws that are weak and poorly enforced can cause serious harm, as the Bhopal gas tragedy showed. While the government has a leading role in this respect, people can exert pressure so that both private companies and the government act in the interests of the society. Environment, as we saw in one example where people have pushed a public cause and the courts have upheld the right to healthy environment as intrinsic to the right to life. In this chapter we have argued that people now must demand that this facility of health environment should be extended to all. Likewise, workers' rights, right to work, right to a fair wage and decent work conditions is an area where the situation is still very unfair. People must demand stronger laws protecting workers' interests so that the right to life is achieved for all. इसी के साथ दोस्तों ये चैप्टर हो जाता है कंप्लीट. और ग्लॉसरी देख लेते हैं हम लोग. कंज्यूमर, एन इंडिविजुअल हु बाइज गुड्स फॉर पर्सनल यूज एंड नॉट फॉर सेल. Producer, a person or organization that produces goods for sale in the market. At times the producer keeps a part of the produce for his own use, like a farmer. Investment, money spent to purchase new machinery or buildings or training so as to be able to increase or modernize production in the future. Workers' unions, an association of workers. Workers' unions are common in factories and offices, but might be also found among other types of workers, say domestic workers unions. The leaders of the union bargain and negotiate with the employer on behalf of its members. The issues include wages, work rules, rules governing hiring, फायरिंग एंड प्रमोशन ऑफ वर्कर्स, बेनिफिट्स एंड वर्क प्लेस सेफ्टी। तो दोस्तों ये चैप्टर हो जाता है कंप्लीट। ये क्या है? ओह अच्छा, ये लास्ट में दे रखा है, देख सकते हैं दोस्तों। द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, ये देख लेते हैं दोस्तों। द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एज अ लिविंग आइडियल। द राइट टू लाइफ इज अ फंडामेंटल राइट दैट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन गारंटीज to all the citizens of this country. As you have read in this book, over the years this right or article 21 has been used by ordinary citizens to include issues to make this right more meaningful and substantial. For example, you have read of how the case of the injured farmer Hakim Sheikh established the right to health as a part of the right to life. Similarly, you read of how the case of slum dwellers being evicted from Mumbai established the right to livelihood as a part of the right to life. In this chapter, you have read about how the court ruled in favor of a person's right to the enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full enjoyment of life. As part of the right to life, in addition to these cases, the courts have also ruled to include the right to education and the right to shelter within this expanded understanding of Article 21. The above expanded understanding of the right to life was achieved through the efforts of ordinary citizens to get justice from the courts when they believed that their fundamental rights were being violated. As you read in several instances in this book, these fundamental rights have also served time and again as the basis for the making of new laws and establishing certain policies to protect all citizens. All of this is possible because our constitution contains certain constitutive rules that work towards protecting the dignity and self-respect of all citizens of India and guard against all forms of possible violations. What these should include is spelled out in the various provisions on fundamental rights and the rule of law. But as the above cases highlight, there is also an intrinsic flexibility to our constitution that allows for a continually expanded list of issues to be included within the idea of dignity and justice that the constitution guarantees. The flexibility allows for new interpretations and therefore the constitution can be considered to be a living document. Thus the right to health, the right to shelter, etc. are issues that were not present in written form in the constitution that members of the Constituent Assembly had presented in 1949, but they were present in spirit, that is, the democratic ideals that the constitution established allowed for persons to use the political process to continually ensure that these ideals became a reality in the lives of ordinary citizens. As the chapters in this book discuss, much has been done in this process of making constitutional ideals into a reality, but as these chapters also point out, a lot still remains to be done. Several struggles by people in different parts of the country serve as a continual reminder that serious issues of equality, dignity and self-respect remain to be realized in the lives of the majority. These struggles, as you read in your class 7 book, are often not covered by the media, but this does not in any way diminish the attention that they deserve. The various chapters in this book have tried to make clear to you the democratic ideals that the constitution contains and the ways in which it affects people's daily lives. We have done this with the intent that this might provide you the tools with which you can critically begin to understand and examine the world around you and participate in it as the constitution prescribes. तो दोस्तों इसी के साथ ये चैप्टर हो जाता है ख़त्म, ये बुक भी हो जाता है ख़त्म पॉलिटिकल साइंस की क्लास 8 की। अब हम लोग शुरू करेंगे बाद में पॉलिटिकल साइंस क्लास 9th। ठीक है दोस्तों, जल्द ही। आप लोगों को बहुत बहुत बधाई दोस्तों कि आप लोग एंड तक बने रहे, और ऐसे ही अगर आप लोग बने रहेंगे दोस्तों तो आपका सोचिए आप लोग को रीडिंग करना भी नहीं पड़ रहा और आपका रीडिंग ऑटोमेटिकली हो जा रहा है इनडायरेक्ट वे में। और आप लोग सोचिए दोस्तों स्पीड भी बढ़ा सकते हैं, आप लोग यूट्यूब पे देख रहे हैं तो स्पीड भी आप लोग आराम से बढ़ा सकते हैं वीडियो देखने का, ताकि आपको टाइम कम लगे दोस्तों। ठीक है, इस प्रकार से आपका रीडिंग बहुत आसान होता जाएगा दोस्तों। अगर आपको पसंद आ रहा है मेरा वीडियो तो आप लोग लाइक शेयर और सब्सक्राइब जरूर करें, और मिलते हैं आपसे नेक्स्ट वीडियो में। मेरे बेस्ट विशेस हमेशा आपके साथ रहते हैं। Thank you and have a nice day.